Hey, today I want to share with you what Yah showed me and my husband while we were celebrating Sukkot on the first day. He exposed a lie from the enemy who uses scripture and twists it to change the narrative to get us to walk astray from Jehovah. What Yeshua really said, pick up your tent and follow me. Okay, let me first start off with the context, Sukkot. If you have never heard of Sukkot, it's the Hebrew word for the Feast of Tabernacles or Festival of Booths. Basically, it's a biblical holiday of living or setting up a tent, basically camping and dwelling, living in a tent, in a temporary dwelling for 7 days. The commandment is found in Leviticus 23. It's not the only place, but this is where the commandment is listed. Leviticus 23, the whole chapter, tells all of Yah's holidays. This is not Jewish. This is not a Judaism tradition. This is Yah's holidays. Yah says these are my appointed days, my Moedim. This has nothing to do with being Jewish. It has everything to do with you being part of the house of Israel. Leviticus 23 says, and Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, on the 15th day, on this 7th new moon, new month, is the festival of Sukkot for 7 days to Yehovah. On the first day is a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work. For 7 days, you bring an offering made by fire to Yehovah. On the 8th day, there shall be a set-apart gathering for you, and you shall bring an offering made by fire to Yehovah. It is a closing festival. You do no servile work. So the context of this, of what we read in Mark chapter 8, and the holiday we were observing is Sukkot. It's the festival of the Feast of Tabernacles. And this is commemorating what Yah did for Israel in the wilderness. Sukkot is a 7-day festival, but Yah added an 8th day, which is a high Sabbath. So the first day of Sukkot and the 8th day are high Sabbaths. He just attached an 8th day to the 7th day festival. So it's kind of all included in one. Okay, this is my second time observing the festival of Sukkot. And I really wanted to dig into the word and understand it even more because scripture is gold. And so when we prayed, we were doing our study and we were reading in Mark chapter 8. So first, let me take you to Exodus. A little bit of a background on the wilderness and even the holiday. So the Israelites, they took down their tents and reassembled them each time they moved from one station to the next. So remember, they're in the wilderness. Yah took them out. He saved them out of Egypt, Mitzrayim, or Egypt. Anytime you hear the word Egypt or the place Egypt, it's also supposed to symbolize sin and bondage and condemnation that we would be facing. So just think, when you think of Egypt, think of bondage to sin and slavery, slaves to sin. And what happened was, of course, they fled their homes. They left, some of the brick and mortar stuff, not that brick and mortar, but they left their lives behind in Egypt. And they were living in temporary dwellings. So they were living in tents. And they surrounded the tabernacle. So all of their camps were around the tabernacle, and there was a cloud. Remember that Yah was in the cloud, led them by day, and then a fire by night, column of fire by night. He would, when the cloud lifted off of the tabernacle and started to move, everyone was warned, hey, it's time to get up and go. They had to tear down their tents and pack it up, and then even tear down the tabernacle, because it's a mobile tabernacle, and then move it. And then wherever the cloud came to rest and stop, then everybody set their tents back up. Can you just imagine, over the 40 years of wandering around the wilderness, that they had to tear down and set up? Like every morning you wake up, you've got to look out your window and look at the tabernacle and see whether or not the cloud is there. Because if it's not, you got to pack everything and go. That's the context. Now, why were they wandering around for 40 years? If you go back and you actually read the Exodus account in the book of Exodus, it was a punishment. It was a punishment because of their rebelliousness and their disobedience, because Yah said, you guys are not listening to me. So as a result, it was the first generation that came out of Egypt, like the adults. None of you are going to make it into the promised land. Everyone aged 20 and younger are going to enter into the promised land. You won't. And so basically he led them around the wilderness for 40 years. It took 40 years for that generation to die off before the rest, those who were 20 years and younger, could enter the promised land. So this is how they lived in the Exodus, in the wilderness. They had to take down their tents and reassemble it. And I did a little bit of research on the Jewish perspective. One of the rabbis explains that the practice of sitting in tents recalls the difficult conditions in which the Israelites lived during the 40 years of wilderness wandering, so that the later day Israelites may appreciate the houses and estates that God provided for them in the land. The tents were to be a reminder of the tents improvised with staves and tent cloth by the nomadic shepherds. And that's key. There's two things that I want you to take away: is the houses and estates that God provided for them in the promised land, and then the tents that were made by nomadic shepherds. This is the account in Exodus 13. Let me just read it from the top, starting at verse 16. That verse 16 is actually in reference to the Passover feast. So it will be like a sign on your hand and like frontlets between your eyes. For by a strong hand, Yehovah brought us out of Egypt. That is a mark. That is a seal of God. His holidays, his festivals, his holidays are marks. So let me continue on with verse 17. After Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them along the road to the land of the Philistines, although that was nearby, for God said the people might change their minds if they see war and return to Egypt. So Yah led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Sea of Reeds, and Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, went up out of the land of Egypt armed. Moses also took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had made the children of Israel swear an oath, quote, God will surely remember you, and men, you are to carry my bones away with you. Verse 20. So the children of Israel, so they journeyed from Sukkot, which is a town called Sukkot because they lived in tents, and encamped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. Yehovah went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, so they could travel both day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night never departed from the people. His presence was there. This, the Shema, one of the marks of God, as opposed to the mark of the beast, which we'll get to later, is key. Remember I said houses and estates? Well, listen, this is the Shema. Hear, O Israel, Yehovah, our Elohim, Yehovah is one. And you shall love Yehovah, your Elohim, with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your might. And these words, which I'm commanding you today, wait, who's commanding this? Yah. Yah is commanding this. These words which I am commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall impress them upon your children, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up, and shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. And it shall be, when Yehovah, your Elohim, brings you into the land of which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzhak, Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you great and good cities which you did not build, and houses filled with all kinds of goods which you did not fill, and wells dug which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you shall eat and be satisfied. Be on guard, lest you forget Yehovah, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, from the house of bondage. Fear Yehovah, your Elohim, and serve him and swear by his name. guys, when they said this, when they spoke these words, when Yah commanded them, they were still in the desert. They were still living in tents. So what they were speaking was in faith that there was going to be a promised land, and there was going to be houses and homes that were going to be permanent, that they were going to move into land and property that was already tilled. And that's literally exactly what he did for them when he used Yeshua, to lead them into the promised land. But that's not the promised land that's permanent. You see, Yah and scripture, he is literal, and there's layers of that one, of what he's speaking. This is not just the promised land that they eventually end up, that Yeshua leads them into the land. That's this promise goes way beyond that little piece of land that today they don't even have, that we don't have. This also refers to the promised land, the new Jerusalem. The new Jerusalem is the promised land that we, living in exile, we are living still in the wilderness, in our temporary dwellings, in our temporary tents, our bodies, and in this life. We have something to look forward to. And that's why we say the Shema, which is his mark, his seal that is placed on the hand and on the forehead. Test everything, my friends, my brothers and sisters. This is important. When I was reading Mark chapter 8, we discovered we had a couple of questions. And so I referred to the Hebrew Gospels of Take Up Your Cross. I want to show you that if you go to www.hebrewgospels.com, you can download for free the Hebrew manuscripts. Yes, Hebrew manuscripts of the Gospels exist. In this case, you can see they are actually from Sepharad, Spain. And there's this website has gone to translate the Hebrew manuscripts of the Gospels into English. So just so you know, your Bible, most Bibles that people have that are translated into English are at least 5 times removed from the original source. I mean, just think of the game telephone, right? You start off with the first person is giving a message, and then even just 5 people down the road, that message might change. Think about 2,000 messages, from like 2,000 years or so. The original word of Yah, the original scriptures started in Hebrew, then was translated to Greek, or actually Aramaic and Greek. And then from Greek, for many, many years from Greek, then Latin, then English. And that's like King James Version English. Then you throw in the 6th one, and that's like modern English. We are that many times removed away from the original source. And for many, many years, pastors and Bible college students are told in seminary and in Bible college, which I went to, that there are no Hebrew manuscripts, that the whole New Testament was originally written in Greek. That's a lie. That's nonsense. That is obsolete information. And apparently that information hasn't been updated, because these Hebrew manuscripts of the Gospels have been around for now a couple of years, and I've never heard of it. This would be mind-blowing. This is like a game changer. Now we have a more authentic source of truth, because Yeshua spoke Hebrew, and the disciples, all the first apostles, were all Jewish Hebrew speakers. And the Gospel, like the Gospel of Matthew, was written to a Jewish audience. Why would they originally write these things in Greek when the Hebrew language is both literal and symbolic and prophetic? I encourage you to please study the Hebrew manuscripts. So when I read Mark chapter 8, I was actually trying to get to Mark chapter 9, verse 2, because that was celebrating, that happened during Sukkot, but my husband wouldn't let me go past Mark chapter 8, where it said, take up your cross. And then I thought to myself, because here we see in Mark chapter 8 that Yeshua says, take up your cross and follow me. But did he really say, take up your cross? That's when I decided to go to the Hebrew manuscripts and read what the Hebrew manuscripts say. And this is what it says. He who wants to follow after me, Yeshua, must deny himself and take warp and woof with him and follow after me. And whosoever wants to save his life will lose it. But he who loses it because of me and because of the good news, he will save it. And what will it profit a man, even if he will have all the world for himself, but he loses his nefesh, his soul? What the heck is warp and woof? This is what the KJV says for this verse. And when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, this is Yeshua, whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. But the manuscript says warp and woof. What the heck is warp and woof? Wait, what does it say in the Greek? How about in the Hebrew? What are the Hebrew words used for warp and woof? Why did the translators use cross? What is the context of what he said? Why would he ever say cross? So many questions. Here's a picture of what warp and woof looks like. So I did a little just search warp and woof. Apparently it's a thing. And it's the underlying structure on which something is built, a base or foundation. The threads in a woven fabric comprise of the warp threads running lengthwise and woof threads running crosswise to create the texture of a fabric, the fundamental structure of any process or system. Basically, a tent. Just like they had to live in the wilderness, they had to set up, tear down anytime the cloud moved. Warp and woof in the context of what Yeshua said was your tent. Take up your tent and follow me. See, the Torah is our glossary. The Torah are the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Anytime that there is a word in the New Testament, especially words that Yeshua say, it's not new, especially with the disciples and the apostles. It's not new. They're quoting from either the Torah, the prophets, or the Psalms. So I had to go back and I had to put on my thinking cap and say, okay, is warp and woof found anywhere in the Old Testament, anywhere in the Torah? Because if it is, then that's what we have to understand what the proper context is. Because you see, Yah plays a lot of word puns. Hebraisms is what I've learned it's called, word puns, because he is like 3 times trying to demonstrate, he's trying to give us an example, like to reinforce his message. Okay, so lo and behold, yes, there are a couple of times where warp and woof, which technically are 2 different words, are used in the Torah and in Hebrew. They're both found in Leviticus 13. Actually, there's several instances of this word, and that they're actually 2 words. So the first one on the left, warp, sheti, which is warp, woven material. And then woof, ereb, is woof, or as mixed, interwoven, a knitted material, mixture, mixed people, mixed company. But this is found in Leviticus 13 for rules for individuals with a rare skin disease or even leprosy, explaining that the sick and unclean, because if you're sick with a condition that's, you're spiritually or ceremonially unclean, must be quarantined. Any fabric they touch that appears to have been contaminated by this skin disease is to be burned. It is unclean. Even the fabric, the woven fabric materials, anything that may have been infected, like maybe, there's like pus or something on your skin, like leprosy. And if you've been like wearing a cloth, like your tunic or your blanket or your lean, if it got in any part of that infection, your skin on it, that's considered unclean. And that piece of fabric or material or item must be burned. But what does the Greek say in the New Testament in Mark chapter 8? So I looked at the Greek word for cross, and the first thing that comes up is stauros. This is the Greek word used in Mark chapter 8, and that means cross. Could mean a crucifixion, could mean a crucifix. It could also just mean crosswise. Okay, so this is a cross. It's a well-known instrument. Like, you could say cross, but like, we now have seen that it means cross stitching of a fabric material. But this idea and the implication is making you think of a crucifix that he was carrying. Okay, but wait, there's a root word. What is the root of this word? That should provide us with a deeper understanding, because stauros came from the base of a root word. So now let's go look at the root word. And the root word, the Greek root word that stauros is built off of is histemi. It's a foundation. So a histemi is the woven fabric of a tent that is put on the structural foundation. It is a base or structure that something or someone uses to fix something upon it. In the biblical usage, the root word histemi is to cause or to make, to stand, to place, put, set, a bid, to stand by, to set up, to affirm, to make firm, fix, establish. You can see the definition here. If you just took that histemi word, you would never get the picture of a cross at all from this root word. Because what this is saying, what we're seeing in the Greek, is that the foundation, there's a foundation, there's a base with something that is cross-stitched. And yet they're having you think that this is a crucifix, which is crazy, isn't it? It's not crazy. It's not crazy because you haven't yet known. Some of you don't know yet why this would be crazy. That it's not the Roman crucifix. It's not a cross that he's referring to. Here is our second witness, which technically is our third witness, because Leviticus 13 is our very first, it's our glossary, it's our foundation. Matthew 16. So I know that in other places in the gospel, these same words were recorded by Yeshua. So does Matthew, because we started in Mark, does Matthew record the same thing? Well, I'm going to go to my Hebrew manuscript of the book of Matthew. And actually, when I did this, when I looked it up, this is how crazy this was, because this is all Yah. I was on my phone when I was reading through the Hebrew manuscripts. I had to leave out of my Hebrew manuscript of Mark. I had to close out of that. When I opened my Adobe from my phone, I went to go open Matthew, and it landed in Matthew 16, staring at me, verse 24. I didn't have to go look for it. I didn't have to do anything. It automatically opened. Yah was leading me to this verse and showed me plain as day. Verse 24. And then Yeshua said to his Talmudim, his disciples, whosoever wants to follow after me is obligated that he should give up hope for himself, and that he take his warp and woof and follow after me. For he who wants to save his nefesh, his soul, his life in this world can save it, but he will lose it because of me. He says warp and woof. This is another testimony in the Hebrew manuscripts that this is what he said, that he did not say cross. According to scripture, a matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. In order for something to be scripturally truth and true, a matter has to be established by 2 or 3 or even more witnesses. This here, I've given you Leviticus 13, I've given you Mark 8 Hebrew manuscripts and Matthew 16 Hebrew manuscripts. Not just that, but I've broken down the Hebrew words that reveal what warp and woof are, which is a woven cross-stitch fabric. There's actually 2 definitions, 2 different Hebrew words for warp and for woof. And then even broke down the Greek histemi and stauros. So the literal meaning of warp and woof is not take up your cross. It's take up your woven fabric and follow me. Now, which item do you think fits the context of Exodus and the context of the holiday? Remember, when Yeshua said those words to the disciples, they were celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot. This holiday is a commemoration where we're all commanded to set up a tent and hang out in a tent for 7 days. Okay, so at this time, they were in Jerusalem, or they were in, near where the other Israelites were. They were all celebrating it. So the context is Exodus, living in tents, and the biblical holiday. What makes more sense? Because this is not coincidence. This is intentional. Yah told his son to say those words, given the context of the holiday. Is it a wooden cross or is it a tent? What makes more sense? This is the picture that you need to understand. And what's surrounding the tabernacle? Tents. Again, there was a cloud that hovered above the tabernacle. That was Yah's presence. And when it lifted and started moving, everyone had to pack up their tents. Even the tabernacle had to be torn down, taken apart, and then they had to start moving. And he did this. So tent versus a cross. The context of the statement was made during Sukkot, a Moedim, an appointed day, a holiday that was all about living in tents, tearing down your camp when the cloud departed and setting up camp when the cloud rested. Now, this might blow you away. You're not going to believe this, but I need you to stay with me. And I need you to be intellectually honest and to be open to the spirit of truth. The cross is the mark of Rome's authority and control, to include their religion, Christianity. Rome is the fourth beast in Daniel's vision and is the sixth and seventh beast of Revelation. Rome hijacked the Hebrew story and celebrated their victory over the Elohim, the God of Israel. More on that later. The Greek manuscripts. Well, someone was being paid by Rome to write or mistranslate fabric into cross. And you take that word cross, I mean, technically, it's not even telling you, the Greek word cross isn't even saying it's a crucifix. It's just saying cross, which is it technically wrong? Well, we're talking about a cross stitching of woven material and fabric. It's not necessarily incorrect, but our pastors and our scholars and a regular layman, if you don't study all the way through, are teaching that it is the crucifix that he's asking us to take. Every one of you are going to take up your crucifixes, follow him. Well, let me put this in perspective for you. The cross, the crucifix, was Rome's instrument of death and execution. It was also their symbol of authority. And when I mean Christianity, I mean Roman Catholicism, which is what Christianity was founded on. Cross, tent, whatever, they both mean the same thing, right? It's really interesting to think of what it really means visually to take up your cross, because it really suggests a burden, something heavy that you have to drag around, or perhaps a reminder to crucify the flesh. But painting it as a burden is not accurate at all. It's not Abba's heart, and it is contrary to what Yeshua actually said. He said to learn from him, for his yoke is easy and burden is light. Real quickly, what the heck is a yoke? Well, you've got two oxen and they're both connected by the neck, right? They're walking together. But apparently the practice has been that there is an older ox and a younger ox. And the older ox has already been broken in and trained on what to do. The younger ox doesn't know what the heck he's doing. And so by being paired with the older, mature ox who is already trained, you put the yoke on the older, mature ox and the younger, newer ox so that he learns from the older, mature ox. That's the symbol. We take the yoke from Yeshua and we put it on ourselves, and he is teaching us. He is training us, or he is supposed to train us. The commandments, the Torah, the instructions are that yoke, but it's not of bondage. It's of training, and it's the instructions for righteousness. Understanding the correct meaning of this passage, the intended point Yeshua was making in the context of the biblical holiday, which they were observing at the time he said these words, is key to understanding what it means to follow him. Yeshua was the cloud that led the Israelites by day. He was the column of fire by night. In the wilderness, he was the bread of life, the manna from heaven. He was the rock that provided the water of life. He is our very sustainer who leads us and provides for us every step of the way. There are no burdens when following him because he sustains us. It's amazing, isn't it? Not to mention that since we see that Yeshua and the apostles were observing a biblical holiday, so should we learn from him and celebrate his appointed days the way Abba, Father, instructs and how Yeshua modeled for us. When we do what he did, when we walk as he walked, we take upon his yoke on us and we learn from him. We are trained by him. His word is that yoke, and we learn by being doers of the word. First John is all about this, but specifically I want to highlight what he says in First John 1:7. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Yeshua, his son, cleanses us from all sin. Our faith in Yeshua Messiah is not passive, it's active, it's engaging. We must be doers of the word. Now, while taking up your cross seems to take a tiny piece of the original intent, it is important to call out what Satan has done to use the beast in twisting scripture, because Yeshua warned about this. The reality of this is not going to be accepted by many. That's why he says that only a few are chosen. The reality is that the cross is Rome's mark. It was the symbol that Constantine claimed to have seen in a vision that he raised up as a banner where he would go and conquer. That was the symbol. Cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree, Deuteronomy 23 says. Yeshua may have been impaled, nailed, or crucified on a tree. But think about it. This is the narrative that the Greeks painted for us, that the Jewish Messiah is being conquered by the Roman beast. That's literally what you're saying and what the picture is being drawn for. That's the narrative. The Greek manuscripts are not 100% perfect, nor are they 100% accurate, but they've been mishandled, probably by people paid by the Vatican, who were employed by the Vatican. The Jewish Messiah being conquered by the Roman beast, and now the Jewish Messiah's raising up the mark of the beast, that makes no sense. Is that what the Jewish authors of the Gospels intended to portray when they wrote their eyewitness account? That's obviously a lie, because that's not what's written in the Hebrew manuscripts. And to this day, that symbol, the cross, has become an idol to millions and has continued to be a mark of the church and her spiritual authority. That's literally what the Pope says. It's the church, and it's a mark of her spiritual authority. Yehovah said to not make any image or representation of him, either by wood, silver, or gold, not in the shape of a human or animal, because we were made in his image. That symbol and mark of the Roman beast comes with false doctrine that is contrary to the truth of the written word of Elohim. Please let me explain. That doctrine replaces the biblical feasts with pagan worship traditions. Christmas, Lent, Easter, and a bunch of others. They're not biblical. They're not biblical. Please pray. Please do your research. They're not biblical, especially when you're rejecting the biblical feasts that are written in the word. You'll never see anywhere in the Bible that mentions Christmas or talks about Christmas or Easter. It's Passover and unleavened bread. The biblical feasts are found in Leviticus 23. That doctrine behind the cross, Romans cross, dismisses the commandments and laws, tells you that the law has been done away with. In fact, Roman Catholicism even changed the 10 commandments. They took the Sabbath and changed it to Sunday worship. That's just one thing that they totally twisted and changed. And that's why churches meet on Sunday mornings. And hardly anyone keeps the Sabbath day. That doctrine suggests Yah has a Gentile church, when that's a lie. He has no, quote, church. He has a family called Israel. The actual Hebrew word that is the equivalent of church is kahal, which means an assembly, a gathering, congregation. Church is just something that Rome has used to control the religion and the people and the country and their empire. And they've done a really great job with it, but it's not the church. He does not have a church. He has a family, and that name is Israel. I can go deeper into that later, but not in this video. We are either grafted into Israel and we take root in the tree, becoming one with Israel, the people, not the Middle Eastern country, or the grafted in branch that doesn't take root and bears no fruit will get cut off and thrown into the fire. Yeshua said that. We must become one with Israel. And I'm not talking about the Middle Eastern country, Israel. I'm also not talking about Judaism, because Judaism added to the word of Yah. They've got other traditions that come from Babylon, and that's not the way. Neither is Christianity the way. There is no religion that leads to Yah. There is only Yeshua and walking in his Father's doctrine. His Father's doctrine are the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, the Hebrew Bible. This is why I believe understanding the truth matters, and praise Yah that he has so much grace and patience with us, that he's going out of his way to call people out from the lies that lead to sin. Brothers and sisters, sin, the biblical definition of sin, is a violation of his Torah, his instructions, his commandments. You don't obey something he says. That's literally the definition of sin. But he calls us out from the lies that lead to sin, that lead to the violation of his commandments. He calls us out of those lies that lead to death and into his marvelous light. Now, my friends, I need you to watch something.
According to Eusebius's writings, it's here at the Milvian Bridge, north of Rome, that Constantine had a vision of the cross and a dream about Jesus that inspired him to win the battle and change the world forever.
So here's the Milvian Bridge. This is the bridge that gets associated with the battle.
So this bridge behind you becomes, in a sense, a metaphor for the change of human history.
Yes. The bridge becomes a way to refer to not necessarily the battle itself, but the consequences of the battle.
Yet in Eusebius's first draft of this account, he doesn't mention Constantine's vision at all.
No vision, no dream yet.
So Eusebius's first account of the battle at the Milvian Bridge that took place somewhere right where we're standing, even Eusebius, who's like a church father, bishop, great admirer of Constantine, does not mention visions.
In that account, no.
Without a vision of Jesus, how did Constantine convince his contemporaries that he had converted to Christianity? Eusebius's own writings suggest that Constantine persuaded Eusebius to rewrite his account of the Milvian Bridge during a great banquet that Constantine held for the leaders of the Christian church in the year 325. After years of persecution, Eusebius and his fellow bishops were now being hosted by the emperor himself. And it seems that it was at this banquet, 13 years after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, that Eusebius first heard anything about Constantine's vision.
So Constantine tells the story about the vision of the cross before the battle at the Milvian Bridge. When Constantine tells the story, he emphasizes, first of all, the vision of a cross in the sky at noontime. Secondly, he then had a dream in which Jesus Christ himself appeared and explained the vision to him.
Almost like he's a prophet. He has visions, he has dreams. Jesus speaks to him.
Precisely.
And here, in these original texts by Eusebius, one can see the impact of Constantine's story on Eusebius and his fellow bishops.
So here's Eusebius's description of the banquet. He compares this banquet with the emperor to the coming of Jesus. And Christians had anticipated if there was going to be a Christian ruler, it might well be Jesus come back to earth. And now suddenly it turns out to be the emperor himself.
Now portrayed as a Christ-like figure, Constantine turned his so-called vision into the official history. And that history was soon propagated by Christian art.
Here we have Raphael.
Yes.
Now Raphael, when he paints the vision in the sky. It's a cross. By this sign you will conquer, and so on. This is mythology becoming history.
Yes. Even without knowing the narrative, you just want to stare at these frescoes. So this is sort of a last attempt to reaffirm this papal narrative, which had already been shown to be a fiction.
A myth based not on history, but on a fiction. But if Eusebius's biography of Constantine represents the myth, What did Constantine really believe in? The only direct link we have to Constantine is his arch, which is adorned by pagan symbols. But on it, we can also see reliefs depicting 3 former emperors: the philosopher Marcus Aurelius, the conqueror Trajan, and the statesman Hadrian, all stolen from previous monuments and strategically recycled for his arch. Begging the question, why would Constantine decorate a monument to his own achievements with reliefs taken from other emperors, unless he was really saying something about himself?
Isn't he telling us what everybody thinks are winners are really losers? And me, I'm the real winner. At the end of the day, I'm going to refashion the world in a way that Hadrian, Trajan, and Marcus Aurelius could not even imagine.
I would agree with you that Constantine would have been very happy if people looking at his arch had been able to take away the message that he is going to supersede the legacy of even Rome's best previous emperors.
But how was he going to do that? The answer may lie at the very top of the arch. Here, there is an inscription, and it states in Latin, Instinctu Divinitatis, which describes Constantine as divinely inspired. But if it's not Jesus who's inspiring him, which God is? When looking at what's depicted on his arch, what we find are pagan gods from the Roman pantheon, and none so prominently rendered as the sun god Apollo.
The light is amazing.
And it's so appropriate with the rising of the sun god right there to have it illuminated by the sun this way.
Before Constantine's alleged vision, he followed the official religion of the Roman Empire, the imperial cult, a pagan religion that worshipped Apollo above all else. Much like the pagan god Mithras, Apollo was the sun god that represented the light of creation. According to the imperial cult, Constantine, as emperor, was a superhuman avatar, the link between Apollo and the rest of humanity. And from the archaeology, it's clear that Constantine bought into this idea completely. He commissioned this 12-meter statue of himself. And not surprisingly, the statue came with an enormous head. Built into this statue's healthy hairline may be evidence that Constantine believed he was more than a mere representative of Apollo.
There are dowel holes that certainly were for some kind of insert, and it seems likely that it was for a rayed crown.
That's not Christian to me. To me, that's saying, I am God.
Right. There's absolutely no humility in any of Constantine's self-fashioning. I mean, he's very happy to have a 40-foot-tall statue of himself looming over this space in the center of Rome. He allows cities in the north of Italy to erect cults to his family, to worship him as a god.
He's aloof, he's giant, and he's godlike.
Yes, he's superhuman. He is superhuman.
The image of Constantine with sun rays emanating from his head not only matches the earliest images of Apollo, it also matches the iconography of Mithras. And is it just coincidence that Christian art begins to depict Jesus the same way, with a halo of light around his head? Or was Constantine combining all the gods of light into one? When Constantine claimed to have had a vision of the Milvian Bridge, which religion was Constantine truly embracing? Did Constantine abandon paganism for Christianity? Or did he blend Apollo and Mithras into Jesus Christ, and then refashion all three in his own image? As it turns out, when Constantine had his arch built, he topped it off with a bronze portrait of himself. Destroyed in antiquity, this statue depicted him riding the same kind of chariot as Apollo, seemingly taking off into sunny skies. Constantine is known to history as the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity, legalize it, and thereby change the world. But the archaeology he left behind suggests an alternative history. His triumphal arch is covered with pagan symbols, and from the statues he erected of himself, it seems that Constantine not only worshipped pagan gods, he saw himself as having a special relationship with them.
If Constantine saw himself as divinely ordained, he would have seen his reign as a new founding. He would have believed that he was responsible for changing the course of human history. And the new founding needs a new capital. Rome would no longer do. So he went to what is today Istanbul in modern-day Turkey, and he founded a new capital for his new empire. He didn't name it after Jesus or the apostles. Rather, he stayed true to his nature, and he named it after himself. He called the new city Constantinople.
He left Rome, and he certainly never returned there again. Settled on this incomparable site. It bridges the two continents. It's strategically and tactically located in virtually an ideal position, easily defended. And I think he wanted a monument to himself. He wanted his own city with his own imprint on it.
Despite Constantine's reputation as the first Christian emperor, the most dominant feature of Constantinople's skyline was not a Christian church, but a giant column that was once topped by a huge bronze statue of the sun god, Apollo. The statue is long gone, and the column is under renovation. But at the time of Constantine, people were worshiping the sun god here.
When the city was built, this was a big plaza or forum, and that column was in the center of it. It's about 100 feet in the air. What's significant about it is that in subsequent years, Christian bishops and theologians were very upset about the fact that the people of Constantinople conducted divine services here.
And yet, Constantine's statue of Apollo was not like other pagan images. He did make a slight modification to it. He replaced Apollo's face with his own.
But what's even better is the tradition continues that in this statue, he put a relic of the true cross. So he's attaching relics of Jesus to, or inserting them in this statue.
So he erects a statue of himself. And this statue depicts him as Apollo, but for good measure, we've got a little bit of the true cross mixed in.
Yes.
Did Constantine pull off the greatest hoax of all time by pretending to be a Christian? Was he actually equating himself with both Apollo and Jesus? Or did he merely see himself as their special emissary? To find out, Simca returns to the arch. But this time, he's not looking at what's on the arch. This time, he's looking at how the arch was positioned. From this bird's-eye view, he is reminded that Constantine's arch is off-center by almost 2 meters from the original road that ran through it. But why? The Romans were famous for their feats of engineering. Surely they wouldn't make a mistake when building the emperor's new arch. There had to be some other reason. A reason that must be hiding in plain sight. Based on ancient records, we know that during Constantine's time, there was a colossal statue that stood 108 meters behind the arch. But this was not just any statue. It was a 30-meter-high monument to Apollo. Is there a connection between the statue and the arch? Expert Elizabeth Marlowe thinks she's found that connection.
So then I started playing around on the living room floor in my apartment, where I made a little cutout of the arch and I propped it up, and I got a doll and I set him up and then set the arch up in front of him, and I worked out the proportions very carefully, lying down and peering through the central passageway. For me, that was the aha moment.
Based on her living room reconstructions, Marlowe came up with a compelling new theory as to why Constantine's arch was built where it was. But to prove her theory, Marlowe first had to brave rush-hour Roman traffic so that she could gain the right perspective. The evidence on the ground confirmed her hypothesis. Constantine's arch was built off-center on the road so as to perfectly frame the Colossus of Apollo behind it. According to Marlowe, as you entered Rome, you would have seen Apollo's head looming above the statue of Constantine on his arch, as if watching over Constantine. But as you moved closer to the arch itself, the sun god would have dropped below Constantine until he was left standing in the center of the main archway.
At the point when the statue is framed in the central passageway, it is the figure of Constantine that is now looming above in the sky.
As the sun is setting, what is rising
is Constantine, yes, yes. The arch is literally a reframing of the sun god, with Constantine on top of the arch.
Marlowe has revealed a clear example where, on the surface, Constantine seems to be putting himself under Apollo, but covertly, he is letting us know that he is greater than Apollo. Can it be that he did the same with Christianity, seemingly worshiping Jesus, while replacing Jesus with himself?
Our investigation has revealed that Constantine merged the great pagan sun gods Mithras and Apollo and replaced their images with his own. Maybe that's not blasphemy by Christian standards, but it does tell us what Constantine thought of himself. By depicting himself with rays of light coming out of his head, Constantine was telling the world that he was to be worshipped as a god. Now, where does that leave Christianity? Was Constantine willing to step aside and bow down to the King of the Jews as any Christian would? I don't think so. I think Constantine took Jesus and refashioned him in his own image, thereby turning the anti-Roman rebel we read about in the Gospels into a symbol of Roman imperialism.
To find evidence for this, Simca travels to the Archbishop's Chapel in Ravenna, Italy, where there's a 6th century mosaic that depicts Jesus in a whole new light.
That's a mosaic of Jesus dressed as a Roman soldier. Although if you look at it more carefully, you can see that he's actually a Roman emperor dressed for command. He's got the military equipment, and of course he has the cross over his shoulder. So you can kind of see that Christ is also taking on the role of being the Roman emperor.
He's depicted as the emperor.
As the emperor in a military role.
So Constantine didn't start running around dressed like Jesus.
Right.
He got Jesus to dress like him.
Right.
The irony is that after Constantine, Jesus, who had been crucified by the Roman army, was now depicted as its leader. But what was Constantine's goal? Was he trying to change Jesus? Or was he trying to replace him? To answer this question, Simca now looks into the plans Constantine made for his own funeral.
Well, he was actually buried in Constantinople in the Church of the Holy Apostles, which no longer exists. It was reported that he was buried with the 12 apostles surrounding him.
So Constantine prepares his burial by creating a real coffin for himself.
Right.
And then these pretend coffins for the other disciples.
Right.
If you take Jesus' place, one way to interpret it is I am Jesus.
Well, you could see it that way. On earth, the Roman emperors do become the stand-in for Jesus, because now with the Christian Roman Empire, the emperor takes on the role as being the leader of the worldwide Christian community.
But by taking Jesus' place, did Constantine see himself as someone who could promote Jesus' message or subvert it? Can the arch also answer this question? From this high vantage point, Simca suddenly makes a discovery that would have never occurred to him below.
How you position something relative to something else, that's sacred geometry. He's essentially putting himself in a relationship with the Flavians.
Just on the other side of Constantine's arch is the famous Colosseum, built by the Emperor Vespasian Flavius. Across on the left is a triumphal arch built by the same emperor's son, Titus Flavius. And in the center, where there is now a circular depression in the grass, once stood a giant fountain built by Vespasian's other son, Domitian Flavius, one of the greatest persecutors of early Christianity. Why would Constantine want to associate himself so intimately with the Flavian dynasty? As it turns out, the first-century Flavian emperors have gone down in history as the men who destroyed Jerusalem and the Holy Temple in it. They could literally boast that they had torched the house of God. Jesus wept for the destruction of the temple. In contrast, by positioning his arch in close proximity to the destroyers of the temple, Constantine was permanently linking his legacy with theirs. But if that wasn't enough, he celebrated the Flavian name as his own. He called himself Flavius Constantinus. Could it be that just as the Flavians boasted that they had defeated the God of Israel, Constantine schemed to defeat the religion that worshipped Jesus as God's Son? But as we have seen, Constantine was going to do it not by oppressing Christianity, but by adopting it, not by defeating it, but by defining it. He would out-Flavian the Flavians. He wouldn't fight people, he would fight their ideas. He would defeat Jesus by transforming him from a crucified Judean rebel into a Roman emperor.
For 1,500 years, people accepted the story that Constantine was a true Christian, that he had a vision of the cross, and that he converted a pagan Roman Empire to Christianity. But our investigation has revealed another story, one that isn't particularly Christian. We're not the first. Other investigators have noticed discrepancies in Constantine's character, but they concluded that maybe he wasn't religious. Maybe he was just pragmatic. But maybe he was religious after all. Not in a Christian sense, but in a pagan sense. It seems that he put his faith in the Son. He believed in the Son's only begotten Son, himself.